Inflation. The world's greatest evil, or something not to be worried too much about if everything else looks good? Or, from your point of view, how is it calculated? Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how important is it to get a good measure of inflation? Well, it's pretty important considering that if you've got bad data, your economy could look a lot better than it really is. Your nominal GDP could be rising super, super fast, but really your economy is going nowhere because that whole inflation of GDP is down to price increases. So, bad political decisions, bad policy happens a lot more when your inflation data are bad. A few kind of odd terms. Aggregate price level. So get to know aggregate as basically the term that means combined or total or overall. We'll have all sorts of aggregates in macroeconomics because we are looking at overall economic levels. And then market basket. Market basket is the name for what you're spending on all of the goods and services in a given year. Sort of like if you're driving your basket through the grocery store, at the end of that trip, you will have to go through the checkout line and pay. And that payment is down to a bunch of goods at their prices, right? So the total cost might be $130. That's each price times its quantity. Let's say if you have 3 dozen eggs at $4 each, that's a $12, plus all the other stuff you have in your basket. Probably, I don't know, ice cream, maybe peanut butter M&Ms, maybe Cheetos, or maybe you're making better decisions than I usually make. So here's an example where you have oranges, grapefruits, and lemons, and specifically you'll be given the number of each that are in your basket. Right, so we've got 200 oranges, 50 grapefruit, 100 lemons, and we want to know what happens to the cost of our market basket over time. For now, let's freeze, so to speak, the number of lemons and grapefruit and oranges in our basket, and let's just look at what happens to prices. So if the price after a frost jumps from 20 to 40 cents for oranges, 60 cents to $1 for grapefruit, 25 cents to 45 cents for lemon, adding all that together, 20 cents times 200. That's what you'd spend all together on oranges. 60 cents times 50, what you spend all together on grapefruit. 25 cents times 100, what you spend all together on lemons. Add that all up and you get $95. Post-frost, prices have jumped, and so you will be spending more, and that turns into $175. More generally, the price index is what, if you're looking at 2 different years, the cost of the market basket in the current year compared to some other year. And this is on our way to developing the measure of inflation. Inflation is simply the percent change in the price index from year to year. But to get it, we've got to get what the price index is. So the price index is always the cost of your market basket this year divided by the cost of the market basket in the base year, whatever that base year is, multiply by 100 to move the decimal point over twice, and you get a price index. All right, so here's a practice question for you. Go ahead and pause and work through the problem, and then I will work it out with you. So the price index is the current cost of the market basket divided by the base year, right? And so 2011, the current cost will be 200 times 50 cents, 100 times 25 cents, 100 times 40 cents, and that's something like $165, I believe. And the nice trick is that now we need to do that cost of market basket in the base year. And what is the base year? $2011. So we're actually in the base year. So this is just going to be the same. So it's going to be 165 over 165. Remember, we got to multiply this whole thing by 100 to move the decimal point over. So we get basically 1 times 100, and that's going to give us the answer. Always in the base year, your price index is going to be 100 because you're going to be in the current and the base are going to be the same number. Another practice question for you. I'll let you pause it and then we'll work through it together. And here is your solution. So we're going to use the same quantities as before, and we already did last year's cost of our market basket, so we can just plug in all the new prices to the old quantities and you get 170, and you divide that by 165 multiplied by 100, you get 103.03-ish. But how do you do the actual inflation rate? That's the thing that is reported on all the time. The inflation rate is can be done a couple of different ways, but the most straightforward way to me is take the percent change in the price index from one year to the next. That's all it is. And stated another way, at the bottom, you can get to PI2, price index year 2 over price index year 1, subtract 1, multiply by 100. It's the same thing. It's just looking at the percent increase in the price index from one year to the next. It's just doing the basic percent change. Practice question using the same data from before, apples, oranges, and bananas. I'll pause so you can work it out, and then we'll do it together. And here comes your answer. And here's your answer. Both ways. You get 3%. What is the consumer price index actually made up of? Well, it matches the typical urban consumer's consumption patterns. So they spend a lot on housing, fair amount on transportation, lots on food and beverages, and then all the other categories you can see. We'll talk more about inflation in another tutorial and lecture, but know that inflation has been slowing down a lot more than it was in the 1970s and 80s. And a few more terms. Consumer price index is not the only game in town. There's a few other price indices used for other purposes, right? So if you want to really care about what producer price costs are going to be like, you use the PPI. The GDP deflator is a broader index that basically figures out the price changes in all of your goods that are being produced inside the GDP, and that's found by getting the ratio of nominal to real GDP, and then you can sort of infer what the overall prices have done. And they tend to move together. For your moment in history, where did the term indexing to the CPI come from? Well, anything that is tied, like wages or payments that are sort of tied to the consumer price index, so that if in a given year if inflation is 5%, your wage automatically rises by 5%. It goes back to the Revolutionary War, where soldiers' pay would be determined by the cost of beef, wool, and leather. Now you know.